Okay, fantastic. Again, thanks so much for coming to my talk on revisiting past decisions. I'm really excited to be a part of Product Camp Europe and humbled to be sharing some of my knowledge with you all here today. So just in terms of what we're going to be covering, first off, I'll just give a quick background about myself. And then we're going to dive into why do we need to revisit product decisions at all, right? What is that benefit? Why do we even need to consider doing this? And then if we do say, okay, well, we made some decision in the past, we've decided that, okay, well, we need to go back and revisit this decision. Well, how do we know when's the right time, right? So how can we look at having different triggers for revisiting decisions? And then let's talk about how using triggers helps to reduce uncertainty, which then overall enables us to ship even more impactful products. And then from there, we'll wrap up and jump into Q&A. So again, real quick, I am Clement. I am the founder of Product Teacher, which is a product management education company. I've shipped 10 multi-million-dollar products over the last 5 years, and I've helped folks from a variety of tech companies in terms of leveling up their product management careers as well as their product organizations. I've written a handful of books, so feel free to find them on Amazon. If you're looking for anything related to my work, feel free to check out productteacher.com. So in terms of product decisions, one of the things that we are very aware of as product managers, as product folks, right, product marketers, et cetera, is that we are decision-making machines. Lots of the time, we are taking all of these different inputs that are not necessarily binary. We're working with all of this gray space, and we're turning it into black and white. We're saying yes or no. We're making some decision. But one of the key mistakes that I see a lot across lots of organizations and across a lot of professionals is that, oh, well, my decision was some decision. It is now set in stone. I no longer need to revisit that. But that's not really a fair assumption to make, because we need to remember that our products are serving markets, and markets are always changing over time. Our previous decisions that we made, those were made in a very specific set of contexts, right? And the decision may no longer apply today. The competitive pressures could be completely different, right? There could be new competitors who are now in the space. There could be competitors who have left. Our original target market segments, they could have shifted over time, right? They could have gotten larger, smaller, their needs could have shifted. The previous constraints that we were under when we were building our products, when we were marketing our products and getting it to market, these may no longer be in play anymore. And so maybe we can go back and revisit what it is that we originally decided on in terms of our product path. We may have new opportunities available to us. There may be new threats that have appeared on the horizon. And so this all just goes to show that if we simply make a decision and we say, okay, I'm done and dusted, I no longer need to think about this ever again, that puts our products at risk. It really means that we are not staying flexible. We are not staying on top of the times. And that's really dangerous for our products. And that's why many new entrants, many new competitors, they will leapfrog ahead of incumbents, because incumbents are saying, well, we've already done our work, right? We no longer need to go back and look at decisions that we've made in the past, right? And so what that does is that newer entrants are typically favored because they will be much closer to true market realities than a lot of incumbents who made these old product decisions that they never revisited again. So we know that, hey, not revisiting decisions is dangerous, but on the flip side, we also can't be second guessing ourselves all of the time, right? So, many times when I give people the advice, well, you should go and make sure that you revisit your product decision, I see kind of the entire opposite end of the spectrum of, oh, well, I'm going to revisit all of my product decisions all of the time. And you can't really do that because whenever we make a decision as product people, this creates a waterfall effect, a downstream effect across all of these different departments, all the way down to our customers. And we need to commit. Every time we revisit some decision, every time we become indecisive or we need to look back, that can create all of this thrash, and that can cause our customers to lose confidence in us. That can cause our stakeholders to lose confidence in us. And so we can't just revisit decisions all of the time for any type of decision, because that can be dangerous. It costs resources and it costs confidence. And so then really the question is, okay, well, I definitely need to revisit my decisions some way, somehow, because if I don't, my competitors will catch up because they will be much closer to true market realities. But on the flip side, I can't revisit my decisions all of the time. So which decisions should I revisit and when? Well, the great thing is that we can actually use what I call triggers to decide when to revisit decisions. Essentially, a trigger, you can think of it as an if-then statement. if something happens, then I will revisit this decision in this way. And by doing so, that means that we are now a lot more confident in our path forward. We no longer need to worry about, oh, well, should I revisit it yet or not? Because we can simply rely on the if statement. Well, if this thing happens, then that's the time to go revisit our decision and to reassess whether we need to change our approach. Whereas if that if clause isn't satisfied, well, then there's no need to worry about it because we already said only when this condition is satisfied are we going to go back and look. Otherwise, we should stay confident that our previous decision still applies. We are still in a good place. Let's focus on other higher leverage decisions to make. So now we have these triggers, but what kinds of triggers should we be using? The way that I see it is that there are really three core kinds of triggers you can use to revisit the decisions that you've made on your product. So really the three are time-based triggers, metric triggers, and fact triggers. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about each of these three. And then what I'm going to do is provide a couple of examples on how you can also leverage it and what that really looks like in real life. So a time trigger is simply after some period of time has passed, let's go back and look at our decision. And the great thing is that most product teams already have some sort of experience using time triggers, right? Every time we look at the roadmap, whenever we're doing a quarterly roadmap refresh or annual roadmap planning, we are using time triggers, where basically after some amount of time has passed, we believe that, oh, well, the market must have changed, right? There could be things that we didn't know about. And so now is about the time that we should go back and take a look. The thing about time-based triggers is that they are relatively easy to implement, right? You say, hey, I made a decision on, let's say, June 3rd, and I'm going to give myself 3 months. On September 3rd, I'm going to go back and look and say, does this decision still apply? Should I go change anything that I made with this decision, using all of the same inputs that I was using? Does that change my output? Does that change the way that I decide on making my product go forward or not? And again, this really works well when you've got something like a roadmap, right? Where you said, hey, on June 3rd, I planned out the roadmap for the next 18 months, right? So I'm going to do initiative A in quarter 1 and then initiative B in quarter 2. But then on September 3rd, when I come back and revisit, I find, oh, well, actually, the market's changed a little bit. Our customer segments are a little bit different. Our revenue streams are different in ways that we didn't quite expect. So let's actually resequence our roadmap. We're going to do initiative B first. Then we're going to go do initiative A. One of the things that can be problematic, though, with simply using time-based triggers is that it's a little bit unrefined. What I mean by that is you don't necessarily know if the underlying reality has actually changed or not. And so that means that you are always going back to look whenever that amount of time has passed, whether that's quarterly or whether that's annually. And just there are a couple of dangers with that, right? Let's say that some competitor has jumped into the market 1 month after you release your roadmap, but you wait the whole 3 months before you go back and revisit. Not super safe. And so one of the things that we need to keep in mind is time-based triggers are pretty easy to implement, but they're not necessarily super refined. And so what are some complements that we can use in terms of identifying, hey, one of our really key assumptions about how our product is serving the market, about how we play within this competitive marketplace has changed, right? How can we make sure that we are continuing to stay abreast of the factors that really matter when it comes to ensuring that our products are driving the most possible impact? Well, the other thing that we can use is we can use metric triggers, essentially thresholds for when some particular metric moves above or below some threshold. Of course, we can't actually use metric triggers unless we've first implemented analytics and tracking. And so please do make sure that you are actually measuring what is going on with your product, because if you're not measuring how it's doing, well, then it's very hard to be able to diagnose, do I need to intervene? The great thing about metric triggers is that you can use them both in the positive case as well as in the negative case. And so as an example, right, and this is the one that product folks are the most familiar with, I've got some dashboard and I say, I know my baseline user engagement sits at about this level. And then you come in on a Monday and you see, oh, darn, our user engagement is suddenly down by 10%. That seems really unexpected. That's when you kick in and you say, okay, well, we need to go back and revisit what it is that we've recently been building. Why did user engagement drop so much? Right? And so that is something that I think we all have lots of experience with. But I think something that a lot of organizations and a lot of product managers don't have in place is looking at metric triggers in the positive case. So as an example, what if your virality, your word of mouth, suddenly jumps upward a lot more than you expected? Well, many times what organizations will say is, oh, well, that's great. We have this unexpected upside, and then we do nothing with it, which is not really what you want to do. What you want to do is you want to go back and look and say, okay, well, we shipped this product originally thinking that we were going to have a virality factor of, let's say, 1.5 times. And right now we're running at 1.8, which is a lot higher than we expected. Is there some missed opportunity here? Should we be further investing in the virality of our product? Or should we continue to double down on our existing bets? Right? And so by having these different metrics in place of these are the things that really matter in terms of the metrics that my product should move. And here are the things where I need to really make sure that my product does not damage the company in terms of NPS or support volume or latency or performance. By having these triggers in place, we can then make sure that, okay, our product is doing what we expect it to do. There has not been some change in the environment that we didn't expect. And then that means that we are now out of date. So to provide a real example, one of the things that I was previously building as a principal product manager is I was building a loan officer engagement workspace for folks to be able to process loans and get them from start to finish. And one of the things that I had aligned on with my support team is we said, look, right now our support team is staffed to be able to handle, some number of monthly inbound volume based on users needing to reset their passwords, right? So don't worry, we can handle the password resets. Go and focus on your other product initiatives because that is where we'll get the most return on investment. And I said, great. But when is it that we should go back and revisit it? Right? So we said, okay, well, if we see that support volume suddenly jumps above this particular threshold, right? If we see that there are a lot of people who are really not making it through that password reset process where they very much need support to intervene, we probably need to build a more productized version of that self-serve user support so that way we're not burning so much support time, even though we are actively making the trade-off that we are going to be losing out in terms of user revenue. And lo and behold, it actually did happen. After a couple of months, we found out, support cases have very much gone through the roof, not because our product had become any less robust, but because we had onboarded so many new customers. And because we onboarded so many new customers, but we didn't also increase the staffing on the support side, we were starting to see a lot of very angry complaints of, look, I'm locked out of my account. I can't get logged back in. If I don't do this, I can't get my business to run, right? And so that's when we said, okay, we have had this if-then statement in place, right? Whenever support volume crosses this threshold, Clement, you will build a better productized version to enable people to reset their passwords rather than having to reach out to support. And so we did that. We did exactly that. And we resolved the problem just in time, right? Where we shipped a user support feature that let people reset their passwords much more easily without having to be bound to support in a way where we weren't sacrificing revenue that we weren't ready to sacrifice, but we also knew that, hey, now is the right time to invest here to make sure that our support counterparts can continue to keep the business. And so that's a real life example of how using metric triggers can help to reduce a lot of noise, right? Because if you didn't have the trigger in place, something that might come up is you might have, oh, well, Clement, I'm getting a lot of this volume and I'm not really sure when you're going to build this or not, right? And I might be in prioritization purgatory where I might say, oh, well, I understand that you're in a lot of pain, but I also need to make sure that I'm tackling these trade-offs and I need to continue building these features. Is it okay if I come back to you later? Right? There would have been all of these different unresolved conversations. Whereas when we had this very clear if-then statement, if support volume crosses this threshold, Clement, you will deprioritize something else. You will build this support resolution. That just made it super clear for all of us. We knew exactly what to expect. And so that really enabled our product team and the rest of our stakeholders to move forward with a lot of confidence. And so that's an example of a metric trigger. And then the final one is what I like to call fact triggers, where you may not be able to actually see the behavior within your product itself, no matter how many different metrics you implement, but something has changed about the environment. Something has changed about your customers. We need to keep in mind that whenever we're making product decisions, we always make them with some set of assumptions in mind. Right? We assume that the competitive landscape looks some way. We assume that the industry looks some way. We assume that different users have these kinds of pains. We assume that these pains are the highest priority. And so we're always making all of these well-reasoned assumptions, but at the end of the day, they're still assumptions. And so when these assumptions are no longer true, it's crucial that we change our initial decision, right? Where we may no longer get the return on investment that we're looking for if we continue down the path that we previously did. And so examples of where facts will change in your environment, sometimes the market will become very fragmented, or sometimes it will suddenly consolidate. Sometimes different countries will pass different laws, and that then means that we have to change the way in which we are building and shipping products. Sometimes industry trends will suddenly shift. Sometimes supply and demand will happen. And of course, all of us are very much aware of the pandemic, right? There are just things that will happen outside of our control where we won't see it impact our numbers yet within the product, right? Not enough time has passed for us to use a time-based metric, but there is something that we know has changed within the industry. And this key piece of information very much impacts the way that we should be building products. And so when we see that there is this specific assumption that I have made about my product, right? I assume that this is the competitive landscape. I assume that these are the users that I should practice. I assume that this is their pain. And we find that that is no longer true. We need to take that step back and say, look, I know I made this decision in the past on how we're going to build this product, but we need to go take a look again with fresh eyes because we have new information now. So as a real example, one of the things that I was previously building as well is I was building out this loan origination platform for small to medium businesses, right? For the organization that I worked at, we were very, very solid in the enterprise marketplace. And we said, okay, well, we're really great with enterprises. We're really great with very, very large customers. What about smaller customers, right? There is some long tail out there of very small customers who are also underserved. Clement, go find a way to help these underserved customers in terms of being able to also originate loans through our platform. So I said, okay, great. I'm going to go do all my market research. And basically, I had a really key assumption of, hey, all of these different small to medium businesses, they're not really consolidated at all. They're super fragmented. And so the way in which they learn about products and the way in which they decide what platform to use is very much dependent on them knowing about us, right? We need to use more of this self-serve model. We need to make sure that they can learn about our platform, and we need to make sure that they're able to onboard themselves. And so we had, as a part of our core product strategy, let's ensure that these small to medium business owners and decision makers are aware of our capabilities, right? Understand the value that we can bring to them, right? One of the things that we said is because these folks are going to be really hesitant to make the shift, especially when they're running their own business with only, 3 to 10 employees, we need to make it very easy for them to switch. So we're going to waive, the first X number of months on the platform just to make it easier for them to switch. And that all made sense until we found out that there was actually an association that was going around and binding up all of these small to medium businesses together, basically turning them into a coalition, into an alliance. And so we said, oh, well, actually, it kind of no longer makes sense for us to treat all of our customers as though they were really fragmented. There's actually a lot of consolidation that's happening now, where if we can work alongside some key associations where they have kind of large pieces of this small to medium business share, that might be a much more compelling way to build this product. And so because of that, we said, look, let's not continue to double down on self-serve. Let's not continue to double down on the free trials. Let's go instead focus on broader partnerships. And so then what do partnerships mean? We need to build out integrations, right? That changes the product strategy. We need to change our pricing model. We need to change the way in which we market and position ourselves. And so all of these things we did without seeing that any particular metric had fallen through the roof from a dashboard perspective, right? We weren't waiting on kind of a quarterly refresh. We just saw that kind of in the news more and more and more. Hey, this small to medium business owner now belongs to this association. And hey, well, this small to medium business owner now belongs to that association. And hey, these associations are trying to make decisions on what loan origination platforms they want to use. And so by keeping that fact trigger in mind of, we assumed that it was going to be fragmented. That's why we decided on this product strategy. And now we know that it's no longer this way. That then really enabled us to move forward with confidence to say, okay, it's all right that we are going to pivot. It doesn't mean that we were wrong. It just means that the market has changed. And so we're now going to be pursuing more partnerships, more integrations, because that is the way that the market now transacts. And so that's an example of using a fact trigger to make sure that your product isn't headed down the wrong lane without kind of revisiting what are the key things that you need to make sure about as you're building a product for success. And so from this perspective then, how do our triggers reduce uncertainty, right? Kind of what is the entire point of using these triggers? Well, anytime we make a decision, we make this decision with some set of assumptions in mind, as I mentioned before. And the great thing is that we can say, here are the things that really create the most risk. Here are the things that really create the most uncertainty. And rather than just worrying about it, where we aren't sure whether something could pop up that we're not aware of, whether we are spending sleepless nights worrying about things that will happen, we can instead say, you know what? If I'm worried about it, I'm going to put a trigger in place, right? And if I'm not worried about it, if it's a very low risk decision, who even needs the trigger? We can just iterate through it much more quickly. And so the great thing with triggers is that we have an action plan to ensure that our products are relevant over time. And so as an example, if you are deciding that, if you're not sure that I don't really know what could change. I don't really know if there are market segments that are going to change. I don't really know whether there's any risk here, but I do know that I shouldn't let it be outdated. As an example, roadmaps. Then we should use time triggers, right? Because we don't necessarily know, well, what could cause our decision to be outdated, but we know that it will become outdated. Right? And that's a really great time to use time triggers. If you have a hunch that the numbers could change on you, and that could very much change the way in which you build a product, the way in which you ship and deliver a product and bring it to market, and then you want to go ahead and use metric triggers, right? So these core things are the things that I'm going to be monitoring, and if it crosses some threshold, we're going to take this action plan. If it never crosses that threshold, that's great. Let's not worry about it. And then we use fact triggers if we have a hunch that the market is going to change. If there's a key assumption that we have about, well, this is the way that this market runs, but that we're not going to necessarily detect it if we just wait over time or if we just look at our metrics. And of course, it's not like you can only use one trigger at a time. Right? So for any given decision, you can absolutely use a combination of these. Right? The higher risk, the higher impact your decision is, the better it is for you to layer on additional triggers, because then that helps you eliminate more and more of the risk. But there's a cost to that, because the more triggers you put in place, the more things you're monitoring over time. And so you don't want to necessarily put in all of these time triggers and metric triggers and fact triggers. Let's say if you're just changing the copy on one of your emails, right? Just changing a little bit of text is not super end of the world, right? And so we don't necessarily want to go overboard, but if we know that it's something that could really impact the business, right? If we are really betting on this product that's really going to make a dent in the world, then we should add in these triggers. And that way we'll feel a lot more confident about making forward progress. So to recap, as product managers, as product people, we're not just in charge of making decisions. It's also our responsibility to make sure that our decisions stay up to date. They stay relevant. We need to revisit our past decisions. But problematically, we can't revisit every decision all the time because that costs resources, that causes loss of confidence. So what we do is for the highest impact decisions that we make, we can add different kinds of triggers to make sure that we revisit it at the right time. And so there are three kinds of triggers that we can use. There are time-based metrics where some amount of period has passed. Let's go back and just make sure that nothing's changed on that we weren't aware of. We can use metric-based triggers. So, okay, well, these are the core metrics that we care about. If it goes above or below some threshold, we need to revisit our decision. And fact-based triggers of, hey, well, if the market changes in this way, we really need to go rethink our strategy. By using the right trigger based on the kind of risk that we're trying to mitigate, we can sleep much better at night and make sure that we're always staying proactive and on offense as product people. And with that, that wraps up how to revisit product decisions. More than happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you very much, Clement, for your presentation. Maybe anyone in the Zoom call want to ask questions. I don't see questions so far in the YouTube translation. Okay, then. Okay, thank you, Clement, very much for the presentation and for the time that you dedicated to us. It was a great pleasure